Hey, Dustin Vanoy here. It's been a little bit. I had some vacations. I had the privilege to speak at some different conferences, which was awesome. And one of the things I've been working on, I've been really trying to find time to make a video on. And so here we go. I have learned that building out my demos, helping people with proof of concept, prototype work, that AI coding tools have been super helpful. So there's terms for this like vibe coding. Essentially, I'm using AI to work with me and help me write code, edit code, test code, explain code. It's kind of my assistant throughout the journey and a little more an assistant. I'm basically giving it tasks to do, letting it do its thing, but I'm very much involved in the loop and going back and forth. And I think the naming kind of fits the style I picture when I talk about vibe coding, which is there's some trial and error. There's some iterative development might be the better term for it because, you learn a lot as each thing gets developed, but it's a bit of a back and forth process. And sometimes you get a little annoyed that little things get wrong. Now, there's another concept I had the chance to work with Robbie Kiscanyon and Juan La Madrid at Databricks on, which is context engineering. I'm still, I'd say, trying to figure out the right balance of when is context engineering the right approach, at least in the way that we kind of found it to be really effective versus vibe coding. That is a topic for another day. The number one thing you'll need to know that I will talk about a bit throughout this video is that if I just take this agent and I try and use it to write code and I don't give it enough context, enough guidance as to what rules I want to follow, what technology I want to use, what examples match the kind of code I'm looking for, I'm not going to get great results. And I'm going to sit there and go on LinkedIn or wherever and complain about how vibe coding is a sham. If I start to apply the right context at the right time, I'm going to get much different, much better results. And I think it's going to make me a more effective developer. I think this is the time in the video where I need to pause and say that I believe this type of capability, AI coding tools, AI enhanced development, is essential for our future to be employed as developers, as people that are building out data platforms. I think this type of tooling is here to stay. It'll continue to evolve and change, of course, but I think you're going to need to know how to do this. So why not start now? If this is your first time getting hands-on with it, you're probably a little bit behind, but it's okay. It's not too late. And I'm here to try and help you get hands-on and really start to get your head around the very basics that are needed. Okay. With that, in this video, I need to cover a few concepts. And I'm really going to focus on using Cursor IDE effectively for Databricks focused projects. All right. So I'm putting together Databricks usage, Cursor IDE. You'll see a lot of similarities to how I've talked about using Visual Studio Code in the past, except we've got these AI tools built in. And obviously it's a different developer interface we're working with. All right. With that, the only other thing I'll say before we get a little deeper into technical content is I might be coming back with talks on Claude Code and some of the other types of tools I'll mention. I might get a chance to talk about what this looks like in the workspace or at least add some links to the description. So check out the description for what's out there already by other people. And I'll try to keep building on this content if I can find the time in the future. So with that, let's get into what I want to share about what it looks like to do Databricks development using AI and an IDE outside of your Databricks workspace. So let's cover some concepts I think are critical for the demos that I'll kind of put all the pieces together during the demo. Essentially, AI enhanced development is something that I think is really critical, right? I just said that, but it's also something that is really powerful with Databricks. There's different ways you can do this, but essentially Cursor IDE is one way to effectively use AI on Databricks focused projects. So I'll mostly show some Python, PySpark code. I'll show a little bit of SQL code as well. This is very much a developing from an IDE that has these tools built in is what this video is about. Try to catch future videos and maybe I'll put some links to other sessions that cover Claude Code, cover in the workspace, things like that. All right, so Databricks development using AI plus an IDE. We have a few different options to work with. But what I mostly want to say is that why would we even use an IDE? Maybe you've heard this story, maybe you haven't, but essentially sometimes as a developer, data engineer, data scientist, etc., I'm more comfortable with a programming interface on my laptop. It's something I've been using before. I might be using it on other projects and I'm just more comfortable. In addition, it has really powerful tools for like replacing things across a lot of files, jumping around, all those sorts of things. In addition, though, with AI tooling, we now have a suite of tools that can run within my local environment that aren't necessarily available on Databricks. They look different within the Databricks workspace, and you're going to have a different experience, and you'll need to choose which one's better for you, or maybe project by project, choose a preference, okay? So when we're working from our IDE, one of the things that at this point I think is still, always a recommendation I give is to use Databricks Connect. And so when we use Databricks Connect, we actually can work with any IDE, any terminal interface that we want, and just get it connected correctly to Databricks Connect to do that integration with Databricks. If you've seen my Visual Studio Code extension videos and things about developer experience with Databricks, you've probably seen me talk about Databricks Connect. There's going to be some repetition here. Feel free to jump ahead. That's cool. But let's talk about which different tools I see right now being really popular. So Visual Studio Code has been like this solid developer interface, and it's what the Databricks integration was originally created for. And that continues to be an option. It has Copilot. There's probably other tools you can plug into. It's not something I've been spending as much time on because Cursor came out, which is a VS Code fork that integrates these AI capabilities. And I had some questions come in about it. I was like, oh, this is starting to get a little more popular, it seems. So once I got hands-on, I really liked the experience, and I've been working with Cursor for a lot of the things I do, especially when I want to have AI help me generate a lot of code, write tests, things like that. Now, something I just got an email about super recent. By the time you see this video, maybe it's like past beta and it's out there much more consistently. But Cursor CLI, to do this sort of thing from the terminal, which also means you can then integrate it to other IDEs, the Cursor capabilities. That is something that's in beta right now, and we'll see. I think I'll probably try it out, and if I love it, I'll try and make a video on it at some point. Now, something I have tried out that's terminal-based, not so much IDE-based, is Claude Code. So because it's terminal-based, that also means I can use it from Cursor, I can use it from VS Code, PyCharm, and so on. It's really a way, I like to use Claude Code for, I'm going to provide a bunch of like requirements and context for what I want to build. Usually I'm thinking a little bit more bigger project than what I'm vibe coding with Cursor. And then I'm going to go ahead and say, go run this. It's going to do its thing in the background. I can keep working. I have another screen here. I keep doing my day job or working on whatever else I have happening. And then it's going to prompt me for agreement that, hey, can I create these files? Can I run this code? And you can kind of go through some processes there. I think it's really powerful. I think integrating it into the way you're using Cursor is also a good idea. That's not what I'm going to focus on the rest of this video. Maybe I'll come back and talk about it. If not, search the web and you'll see. You're still going to get benefits from Databricks Connect. And you also, for all of these, will get benefits from using Databricks Asset Bundles. Now, if you're not familiar, I have lots of videos on this as well. Databricks Asset Bundles I tend to think of it as a way to basically source control and deploy my workflows and my resources. It's much more than just Databricks workflows, to be clear. Get those deployed into different Databricks environments from dev to test to prod, right? But it also is really powerful in the development workflow, especially when I can tell something like Claude Code or Cursor Agent, hey, go ahead and build this out, build out like a Databricks job, run the bundle validate command and make sure it's valid, and go ahead and deploy and run this job using Databricks Asset Bundles and keep iterating on that until it's right. Now, I keep an eye on it still. I don't just let it go crazy overnight, usually, because I want to make sure it's not just like in this loop that's not getting me anywhere productive. But that is a way to really use Asset Bundles powerfully within these tools. So as we think about how this works, maybe you've heard this before, but just a quick kind of catch up for everyone. Regardless of IDE you're using, with Databricks Connect, we have a special library called Databricks Connect, a special session, which is a Databricks session. And I can, depending on how my profile is set up, I can go ahead and just get connected. And what it's going to do is it's going to take all of the Spark code that needs to run. It's going to build up that Spark plan on my local machine, wherever I'm running this from, and submit only the Spark portion to Databricks Compute, or Databricks Cluster or Serverless Compute. Okay. The other pieces and the other dependent libraries that aren't part of my Spark job will be happening locally. This is the biggest mindset shift. Once you understand this, I found it to be still a really nice way to work and really powerful. If you really need the compute of a cluster, you don't have enough compute power for the non-Spark things locally, you'd probably be looking for other options. And so right now I'm going to show you, for most people, especially data engineers that are doing heavy Spark workloads, I think Databricks Connect is a great fit. I'm going to show you as best I can how to get into it and get it set up properly without getting stuck in the authentication phase, which is one of the trickiest pieces of the whole process. So As we're developing with Databricks Connect, we're going to go ahead and get it installed. We're going to configure it by giving it a workspace URL. You essentially would have a profile attached to each workspace URL you want to work with. My recommendation, the number one thing to simplify your life with these AI tools in Databricks Connect is go ahead and use the default profile. The one name default is what this library will look for automatically. Set that up properly, authenticate with default, and set up your cluster ID or the entry for serverless compute on that profile. And then you don't have to keep telling AI which profile to use and setting all these complex rules. What that means is as I'm developing and I shift from like a development 1 environment that has certain capabilities to development 2 workspace, I actually just change which one's my default profile. And that's how I kind of stick with the default being the way to go. It shouldn't be that hard to add instructions and rules to use a specific profile. I don't like leaving things to chance. I like to know that default's the one that's in play. So as we look at this, I'm going to show you the default setup for Cursor and using Databricks Connect, and I'll even show you the Databricks extension and where asset bundles would show up if we're using them. I'm also then going to show you sort of some of the flaws that happen if I only use the default environment. So as we use this, what I'm hoping to show you in the demo portion is that we need Cursor rules to be effective. If we're working in Claude Code, it's got its own way of applying context and adding in some rules and instructions, but we need Cursor rules to be effective. These are going to really give a certain amount of guidance as to how we want things done. We don't want the AI to decide our project structure for us, at least not too much. We don't want it to decide, whether to use unit test or PyTest. We want to make a few of these decisions along the way. And we probably are going to repeat these project after project, repository after repository. And that's where Cursor rules really comes in for me. In addition, you've probably heard this MCP term, Model Context Protocol. So I keep getting asked questions around, does Databricks have an MCP to go and do all of the work? Let the agent go do all this work against Databricks. And the answer is a little complicated there. Databricks has a few managed MCPs that will help us along the way. But ultimately, I think Databricks Connect and even just making sure the Databricks command line interface, Databricks CLI is available to your agents will get you really far. And you're not necessarily lacking an MCP to start being productive, especially in more of a vibe coding, hands-on, back and forth with the AI tool helping you type of experience. So I'm going to show you one MCP in particular, and I'm going to call out a couple of MCPs that can be useful as well. The one that I use a lot is called Context 7, and this is a way to get documentation across many different tech stacks, get documentation available to my agent. So when I'm writing with the Databricks SDK, I really need I need the agent that's doing the work, the AI tool doing the work, to figure out what the right syntax is. There's a couple ways I can do this, but essentially Context 7 gives me the docs available and I can say, hey, use this to go find the updated documentation before you write this piece of code. As we're working, you can find other MCPs to apply and use, and you can probably find a lot more content about here is a Databricks focused MCP that's been created, and I think it's really worth looking at. These YouTube videos I've learned last a long time, and so I don't want to say this is the right one to use for the long term. I will put some links in the description here of things that help me get to the point I'm at in case you want to go dig kind of in that research I did, and some of the things that are in progress that are publicly accessible for you to go take a look at, but I'm not entirely sure which one you'll be wanting to use a few months down the road. Okay. So with that, what I'd like to do next is jump into a demo and walk through setting up Cursor, which is kind of familiar if you've gone through any of the Visual Studio Code setup before. Walk through then how do we use Cursor Chat and Cursor Agent to actually get some code written. See a few flaws that happen when I don't provide rules and I don't have any additional context really, or not enough context for the tooling to work with. And then we'll see something that goes a bit smoother with the rules and context that I'll add. That's really the agenda for this. Focused on Cursor and how that works. I'll try to reference other tooling as I go, but mostly you can look out for either future videos from me or, go search and see what others are saying. Once you know to use Databricks Connect, all the other guidance about Claude Code, using other tooling really does seem to apply pretty well once you know how to connect to Databricks. So with that, let's jump into the demo. Okay, so the first thing you'll need to do is actually get Cursor installed on your machine if you don't already have it. You can go to Cursor's website and get it downloaded for whatever system you have. Go ahead and go through the install process, which I think will be pretty straightforward. Once you get installed, it'll either prompt you right away, or you can open it up and get to actually sign in or sign up if you do not have an account with Cursor yet. I went ahead and started off on the 14-day trial. I kind of had to start and stop with this video, so I eventually switched to a paid version at the like $20 a month plan at this point. So get yourself logged in. That way you have all the features, even if it's the trial for now. And then we can really start to get into the rest of the demo here. I'm going to open up a project that this is tied to GitHub. There's not a lot here yet, but this is my coding tools project, really just so that I've got a place to save. Essentially, the idea is that as I'm working with AI coding tools, I definitely want to commit my code pretty regularly. I tend to handle that myself rather than having the AI tooling do it. And just make sure that as I'm about to tell it to go rewrite something, I save the version before if I think it's at all useful. The place we're going to start with this demo is really just getting a super basic Databricks Connect example. Because as I said, Databricks Connect is going to be kind of your best way to work from the IDE in a really interactive fashion. The asset bundles method that I mentioned before is a great way to let the agent try to do things and kind of tell you if it's working or not. So as we come in, I'm going to go ahead and get a new file created with this example. You can definitely follow along if you want to, but actually you probably don't want to follow along this version. You probably want to wait until the second part of the video where I'm going to show you how I set up some rules and things. If you haven't before set up Databricks Connect or the Databricks extension, let's talk through that for a little bit. Feel free to skip to the next section of this video if you already know how to do that. So what I'm going to show you here is that when I click run, it's going to try to use a special Databricks Connect library, which I do not have installed yet. I actually haven't even picked a virtual environment. You always want to use some sort of virtual environment with Python. You'll see that you may notice that I sometimes use UV for my Python dependencies, and I create a virtual environment from those UV managed dependencies. Other times I just handle it all myself, a lot of times with VS Code or Cursor creating the virtual environment for me. I do like to use the Databricks extension. I've been told it's especially helpful for your AI tooling when you have the asset bundles included as well. A lot of times I'd say you could totally get by with setting up your profile manually and using Databricks Connect without the Databricks extension. It's really a matter of preference. I'll show you here, like once we have this installed, just by following some basic steps, we really then can use it to help us get our virtual environment set up properly. I'm going to move this to the top of my list of extensions so I can easily reference it as we go. I'm going to go ahead and create my first configuration within this project by clicking the big blue button. If you already had a bundle in here, like a databricks.yaml file, then you could select that instead. If you're setting this up for the first time, just know that you can grab the host from the actual URL for your workspace. And that's what will need to be, if you're using the extension, both in your databricks.yaml file as the host, and it can be set up with the config in the profile. I typically use OAuth for this video in this particular environment. I'm going to go ahead and use an access token. You can go with whichever option's better. Pretty well documented. I've done this in my earlier VS Code videos. If you're struggling with this, go watch one of those videos that covers it a little more in depth. Once we've got that, just a very basic setup here, I'm going to be able to create a default profile. And I would recommend using this naming of default in all caps. And that's what I'm going to use with Databricks Connect, both when I'm running from the Databricks extension, running with kind of the built-in cursor run options, and if I'm having either my terminal or my agent try to run some Python code. I'm always going to want to make sure it uses this virtual environment and that it's using the default profile. Certainly there's other ways to do this where you have multiple profiles and you switch around. Really what I'm trying to do is simplify things for you by saying if you keep whatever you're doing the default, essentially it'll make things a lot easier for you because you can assume that this code's going to try using default. Once we get to this point, we've created a profile within our configuration file, and we still would want to go and add a cluster to it. So essentially what we're going to do, we can pick one on the extension, which will help with some of the ways we run this code, But if we're really going to let the terminal or agent run our code, then we'd also want to go and update our profile with that same cluster, whatever the appropriate cluster is. And there's a special syntax if you're doing this with serverless compute. So if you haven't set that cluster ID yet, this is what the error message looks like. And the process I go through is typically to use this off button to get to my profile. You can see it's actually at your user home under .databricks CFG, and you can go find it. So you can either set this cluster ID equals option, or you could do serverless compute ID equals auto. And that'd be serverless underscore compute underscore ID equals auto. Those are the options I would typically go with. So if this is your first time setting up the virtual environment, make sure you do get Databricks Connect installed. In my case, I'll use the extension to do it. And if needed, I will go and change the version that gets installed by the extension to match what's best for my runtime that I'll be connected to. Okay, so I've got my environment set up correctly, my profile set up. I tend to use the built-in Cursor run option, which will basically set me up to make sure that I can kick this off locally, and Databricks Connect is set up to do the right connection. The Databricks Run button, which has the Databricks icon, is really good, and I use it at times, but it's kind of built a little bit differently. And essentially, I'm just not sure once I go working with my agent that it's going to try to run it the same way. And so if I run it with this built-in cursor button, it's a little bit more similar to what the agent would be able to run on its own. So here we go. We have results. This honestly isn't very exciting because we knew this would work. This is a code straight out of the docs. We just had to get our environment set up. And since that's a stumbling block for some people, I wanted to show a little bit of the steps involved. Now we're ready to do something more exciting, which is make an IPython notebook version of this. If you prefer to work with notebooks, I would recommend when running from Cursor that you're using IPython notebook format rather than kind of the Databricks source file format. So once we get everything set up to run here, it's probably going to prompt me about installing some IPy things as I work with different features. That's fine. I just kind of install things as I go. And these are really local only tools. So it might be nice to add them to like a requirements dev. Usually I just let each person kind of work through it on their own machine though, because it's pretty straightforward. It'll tell you exactly what it needs to do. So as we continue to go, we will get all of this running and know that we are ready to use a notebook and add a little bit of additional cells and do exploration ourselves, or start to actually use the built-in Cursor tools. Really important here. The main point of this section is that we can work with notebooks from Cursor. We can run them against our Databricks compute using kind of the way that Databricks Connect works that I covered earlier. And we can then, without adding extra benefits like rules, MCPs, docs, like really the context that's going to make this a lot better, we can start to get some value out of the AI tooling right away. So let's look at this approach, but we're also going to see some flaws. So just be ready for that. And I'm also going to skip ahead where I can to avoid you sitting there watching the AI think or me troubleshoot something that's probably going to be a little bit different than what you experience in your day-to-day. Let's jump back to our Python version and get started with using our AI tools. We will, from our Python file, we will open up our AI tools with this option at the top right. Additional things to call out are that we have an auto for our model right now. You'll probably see me change this through the video because some models don't work well with notebooks, and I'm just going to use one that I use often, which is Claude Sonnet 4 throughout part of this video. Also, we have the agent or chat mode, which we can select from this option here. From here, what I want to do is first recognize that that one tab that it's showing right above my cursor is telling me that the tab I have open is already in context. It knows about the code on this tab. So let's get started with a pretty simple prompt, which is we want to update our data frame to include an average fare per mile. And we'll give it the hint, since this is the first time really asking to do anything, that trip distance is key to the per mile piece of this. So it's created this very simple thing. It looks about right to me. I will accept it. It is going to tell me a heck of a lot about why it did it and how it did it. You can try to like have some system instructions or rules that say to be a little less chatty, right? So looking at this, it did process, it does have data. Seems fine enough to me. Not going to get too caught up in the exact logic for this video. Of course, if this was for a job I'm building for my real company, I would spend a lot more time making sure it's valid. But we did actually have an issue I can see here. And so let me go and debug that and get us back on track. Okay, I did this the old-fashioned way for now, and I scrolled until I found the error, and I can see that there's a divide by error message. It even in the Spark exception is telling me that I could use try divide instead, because it seems to be trying to divide by a null, which does not work. Now, the less old-fashioned way, and we'll see how well this goes, is I can paste this error into my context and say to fix the error message. And you probably saw it had a little add to chat message as I was hovering over it. So it's going to hopefully recognize, because it really was pretty clear in the error message once we got to it, what type of change is needed. It's going to do the import. It's going to let me take a look and keep what I want. You can go into some different modes to try to avoid having to review everything it does. And depending on, how much I'm expecting the agent to build versus me build, I might switch up the modes and the permissions a little bit. But for now, I'll probably review and approve almost every change in this video. Here, I'm just going to do a little bit of exploration on my own, make sure roughly things look right, or at least not too crazy before we move on. And then we'll try some more prompting here. Before we continue, I really do want to get back to using a notebook. I think that's how quite a few people that have been asking questions about Cursor plan to work. And so we're going to create an IPython notebook. That is going to be probably the easiest way to work from my local machine, whether it's VS Code or Cursor or something else. And I can still use a lot of the Databricks functionality, and that's compatible with the IPy kernel. I typically have the Databricks extension turned on. Full disclosure, I don't know exactly what's different about compatibility if I don't have the extension. At this point, I've kind of lost track because I'm so used to having it on. So I'll add a few cells, do a little bit more, just making sure my code is functioning, get us to a good spot, and then we can continue with some more prompts. So I decided to save this to a table that I can then work with going forward. And you could see that it was actually filling in, providing suggestions, and I'd hit tab to accept them. And it got me somewhere a little closer than I would have got without the AI help. It didn't know what to call my table, so I went ahead and set a value I'm okay with. And we'll make sure that's done, and then we can try to do something with the results of this table. Certain models won't let me modify my notebook. I know for sure that Claude 4 Sonnet will, so I'm just going to select that directly for now. If you have a favorite model, feel free to try it. I'm not necessarily saying I know the best model to use for each task, but I do know that this will get me past this message. So now I'm going to give it a really pretty direct message of add to my notebook this exact sort of idea, and I'll let it write this code, and then I can decide to keep it and run it myself. Great, I've got a result. I now know the number of records, and I can move on to something else with this code. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and have it try to add a function and a unit test. I'm going to give it a little bit specific instructions here, but still leave it a bit open-ended, which kind of shows a bit about the shortcomings if I don't give it enough context. So it's going to do a pretty good job, spoiler alert, though we might have to work through a few things here. So let's kind of skip through some of the processing it does and talk about the results we get. So first, we are going to see it add this function, and I get the chance to keep this and review this as it's still working on the unit test to go with it. So it's got both the function and a unit test all within the same notebook, which is kind of the first spot that things are going wrong from what I really want. And then it just assumes that I want to see this actually used, which is kind of true, right? I probably want to incorporate it in my code, but it's kind of taking an extra step here as well. And so let's go ahead and run this, figure out how much of this works and what needs tweaked. So essentially what happened is it got the wrong field name. It guessed at a field name for a location. And so I just needed to correct it and have it go through and reprocess the changes. Okay, and now we have some code that actually runs. My main concern here is I don't like it all being in one file. Really, I want a better structured Python project where test is its own directory and functions have their own location. So I'm just going to tell it to try and fix what it already did. Along the way, it is going to prompt me for everything. Notice that I can allow list certain instructions. So here it's going to try to run the unit test for me, and I need to try to get it to actually use the virtual environment correctly. Okay, so with a little bit of work, it split it into a test section. I got it to run with the virtual environment, which was successful. And it also, I prompted it to move the function code into its own library folder. So these are all things that ideally it would know to do from the start, and I don't have to remember to prompt it every time for this. So we can see how it's organized a my library directory with a Python module fair calculations, which should include that function. It should be importing and using that from the notebook. It still may not be formatted and set up exactly how I want, but it's functional. It's in a decent spot here. So I went ahead and keep all those changes, and now I want to run the notebook to make sure it's working. One of the mistakes I've made quite a few times is assuming things are good and moving forward with my coding, my vibe coding process without actually validating a good chunk of work that's been done. And before I move on, I'd probably clean up a little bit of the print statements and kind of chattiness, even in the code that my agent has done for me. So with that, let's take a look at how we can do this a bit better by having a better setup to begin with. And this is just kind of the starting point that you'll need to practice and get the hang of if you want to have much more efficient vibe coding sessions with Databricks and Cursor. So there's a couple things that have happened as I worked with this. At least one of them you got to see a moment ago, which is that we tried to create tests and it was kind of doing everything in the same notebook, not creating a library for my code and not separating out of the test in the proper structure. So let's start with how we can control this for a new project, and potentially you could use this rule all of the time when you're using Cursor and always get these better results. What we're going to do is create a place for Cursor rules. What I would do is just create the folders manually and go from there. So we won't talk about everything I've got in this folder most likely, but let's start with my Python development rule. So I'm going to move that into the correct location, Cursor rules. I notice it's .cursor rules, so it's a hidden folder, and I can see that when I open this up, it is a little bit of metadata at the top, which actually gets controlled by this selector here within Cursor. I can say only use it with certain file patterns or always apply it to every single chat. So I've got it set to connect for all of my Python files and all of my Python notebooks to use this rule. What I've got is I basically compiled some different things I've found across different repositories. I threw them into an LLM and said, condense this to a smaller set of information. And it's just a bunch of things about how I want to write Python code. A couple of things that come into play are that I call out using PyTest and only PyTest rather than unit tests, just a decision you need to make with Python. You could go the other path, but you want to tell it one way or another what your preference is. I've also got it set up to do dependency management using virtual environments and using UV. I've tried to word this to where if I have a project that I want to skip UV, I can kind of prompt it on the fly without this overruling everything. But probably I'd go and change the rule for that project as well. Now, that is a little bit of a starting point for Python to control what it's going to do. The other thing that I find to be important, and if you've already got a fully sort of set up project, I would do this a little differently. But if I'm starting pretty much from scratch, like I've got here, I went ahead and worked through setting up a bit of a structure that I want it to follow. So what we're going to do is say we want the project set up to have a source folder for my code. And within that, I want some sort of library, like the main set of Python package code I might deploy out and share across multiple projects if I choose to do that. As well, for like Databricks type projects, I tend to have notebooks and other types of sort of main applications that I would actually schedule as a job. So notebooks and regular Python files, and I just put those directly in source directory. At least that's kind of my starting point for a small project. After that, I want to call out the need for a test folder, the need for a docs folder, though I'm not sure I'll actually use this in this simple of a project. The possibility of having some sort of development and setup scripts that aren't meant to be like deployed and used elsewhere. And then a place for internal data, like if I have a little CSV I need to use for some of my testing, or potentially some seed data that needs to get out to the environment. Okay, so you can adapt this type of thing to whatever makes sense for your environment. But the point is, as I scroll through here, I've given it some guidance as to how to organize my code so it doesn't make something up on its own or just put everything in the same file, same folder all the time. Okay, so on my project structure rules, I'm going to go ahead and change that to always apply, at least for now. So we've got our couple of rules to try and get this going the right direction as we give it some prompts. Let's go through some prompts that I used in the first example. We're going to skip some things that I had to iterate through and go with a little bit more straightforward prompting this time. So to start with, in my context right now, I have the Python dev rule because I also have this Python notebook in the context. And that should be enough for now, though there's some things that we can do that we'll keep talking about as we go. I'm in agent mode. I run that command. It's going to go ahead and try to make some changes to this notebook. Okay, as those come up, I can go through and make sure I'm happy with what it's doing here. This looks fine to me. I don't mind importing functions as F. I do that quite a bit. And so that part's done. Great. I could go ahead and run this to make sure it works. I could always try and tell the agent to run it as well. So let's go ahead and add a prompt to write this as a table. I can do something like this, and that should be okay. Now, the thing to notice with Cursor is it doesn't often ask you follow-up questions, like, do you want to do overwrite mode, other things about potential table properties. It doesn't really give you a lot of follow-up questions. It's going to make some assumptions, possibly based on some context and rules you've given it and what you've been doing in this project in the past. So now we can go through and review that it's doing it right. It is choosing overwrite mode, and it has the exact table name I wanted, and it's going to print that it's done. It does tend to print things out. I actually think that's a fine starting point. You could add something to your rules that says, if you go to the actual Cursor rules in place, says something about trying to use logging instead if you want to. So let's go ahead and run this whole thing again. In this case, I'm going to try using my prompt to do it. Let's hope we have some success. Question is it going to pick up the virtual environment? I haven't actually started using UV yet. Is it going to try and go use UV? Let's see here. It is not actually doing it the way I want to, so I'm going to reject this. And instead, I will say use guidance in @Python dev. So I'm going to basically tell it about environments. So it thinks that it ran it. It thinks that this table exists. Let's go have it check. So we can see it just added a section for confirming that the query actually worked. If I scroll up a little bit, I'll find that that was right here, and I can say go ahead and keep it either by hitting the checkbox, or down below I had the keep option. Okay, table verification's done. I shouldn't really need that again, so I'm going to delete that and continue on. So we've sort of already seen it can figure out Databricks SQL syntax pretty easily. Let's try asking it specifically how many records are in that table now that I know it's run. So in this case, it's built me the code to get what I want, and I can kick it off myself. So now I have another prompt, which is going to start to see how well these rules can help. I'm going to resize. I think we will need to see the structure on the left a bit, and we will need to see my chat better. So what I'm going to ask it is to add a new Python function with the unit test that will add a column to my data frame calculating average fare per mile based on pickup and destination. I have a couple of rules that should be applied. I have only this notebook in context right now. It's telling me that it's using my rule in order to make decisions on this. Let's see how that does. I just saw something that I'm very happy about. It has created a directory for my transformation function, so for my library code. It knows that it needs an init in order to do imports. It knows to break it into its own Python module. And so in my test directory, I can see it has an init folder and it's currently working on the test as we speak. It's going a step further and applying some other things like a requirements.txt. And it is running linting with rough, which is great because I was asking it to do that. Now it's actually trying to run the test for me. So now that I've started getting it moving with running test, it's doing quite a bit better. My only concern is that I don't think it's doing this on my virtual environment yet. So I'm going to say reject or skip, and I'll take care of the install in a moment. So we kind of had to break up our work here because it didn't find virtual environment. So maybe next time go ahead and give it more guidance on the virtual environment before you have it do this step. It's telling me all this information about what it has done. I don't think I put too much in it about wanting the agent to be concise and the chat to be concise, but that is something you can give as like a system instruction to Cursor. So I'm going to go through and make sure I like more or less the code that it's created. So hopefully without looking at the browser on the left, we can kind of get a feel of what's been added where. So in my main notebook, after doing my simple count, it has added a whole nother step to read that table in. It's actually added example usage for this whole set of code. I don't know. I would probably not keep this, but for the sake of moving forward, let's keep this for now. We can always go back and change it, of course. And then I need to browse to the next one that was created. So if I jump into Fare Calculator, I can see that it is using PySpark. It is using a data frame. Shouldn't matter that it's not specifying Databricks Connect here. Though in this example, it's kind of assuming a typical Spark session rather than Databricks Connect. You know, I could get nitpicky and fix some things here, but this isn't a bad start. It is doing some doc strings. It's following the format I told it to. And it wrote a good amount of code for me that I could tweak and condense down as needed. The init scripts are actually doing imports for me to simplify things. It's kind of your choice whether you want this or not. I might go back and tell it to not bother putting anything in the init scripts or in the init Python files. For test, it really doesn't need to, so it just keeps an empty file. That's fine. And then we get to our actual test. There's a few things I'll probably have to change here. So for one, it is using Spark Session, which is why I wanted to install PySpark rather than Databricks Connect. I can easily have it do that differently, but it does create a couple of tests for this. Ooh, it created a lot of tests for this. That's exactly what I wanted to show. Okay, so you see how it created a lot of tests? It's creating a bunch of different classes. I've got one single function in here, not a lot of this other than maybe the very top we have some reusable code. Not a lot of this is worth keeping. So I'm going to say undo on this one. Let me check real quick requirements file. I'm actually going to undo that as well. I don't like that. We'll get to requirements when we need them. So what we've done is I've taken control of what it was doing and said, look, you got the structure right. You have a function that I'm just assuming is good right now. Tell you what, before we keep going, let's make sure this function works standalone, and then we'll go fix our testing. Great, it has code that works. Is it completely right logically? I don't know. I'd have to check more, but that's not the point of today's video. Let's go look at what I want to happen differently with test. So let's work on a couple of things. First is the rule that I need to add. So I have been through this before, and I forgot to add my rule before I did this step. So there is a testing guidelines I've developed, and I'm going to put that into this cursor rules directory, okay? So I'm moving a script that had nothing to do with the rules into the rules folder, so it now takes effect. As always, we need to check, how is this set up? It's already set to apply to specific files, everything under my test directory. Great, now you might be looking at this going, wow, Dustin, you wrote a lot of really clean stuff in this rule here, nice job. That kind of looks time consuming. Truth is, I did something different. I didn't write much of this rule at all. I did generate cursor rules, and I basically said, you just created 8 tests for a single function. I want you to only create maybe 2 tests at most. Make one that's the valid path, and feel free to put a lot of different assertions in there. Make one that's the failure test. Something like this. I actually wrote it differently. I don't need it because I've already got this written, right? But that's the idea, is as I'm going, I can generate cursor rules, and it also has a bit of context of what it just did before I create that rule. Long story short, I did this before, so you didn't have to watch me try and fail at it, though actually this one worked really good on the first try, thankfully, but I don't have that recorded. So now we're going to use that same similar type of prompt that we just did with testing, but we're going to do it with that rule added for testing guidelines. Let me retry having it create a test. I'm going to try, right now we still have my notebook here. I'm going to try saying rerun the last cell using my virtual. So I'm trying to see if it actually knows about my virtual environment yet. Okay, this is not what I wanted to do, so we reject that. Let me try doing something else. Let me try adding more context here. So I'm going to go to my @ sign and say, go ahead and give me this whole thing as the context. And then we can try basically the same command again. Run the code from the last cell. Now we're getting somewhere. It looks like it either knows or is expecting I gave it the exact location. It's going to try and activate that virtual environment. Here we go. Big difference now. We're using virtual environment here, and now I can start to do more things with it. I'll call out UV is a tool for dealing with like Python dependency management and works pretty well. You can use that to do installs and then sync it to the virtual environment as you go. I've been using that more and more, but I haven't really set it up on this machine, I don't think. So I'm going to stick with kind of traditional virtual environment. Hopefully it's smart enough to add a requirements text file again once I get it the right requirements. It looks like I have some sort of pandas or NumPy issue that it's trying to work through. I'm not actually sure. I've seen different errors related to pandas versions before, but let's see if it can fix this for me without me having to stop and remember what's going on. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to my prompt about a function and try this again. I haven't cleared the context, so it probably knows a bit about what it tried before. We'll see whether it adjusts based on this new rule. I'm also going to add something that I should have done at the beginning, which is use Databricks Connect. There's a couple more things I might consider adding, like using the PySpark testing utils as well. Let's just do this for now. Now remember, I didn't clean up everything, so it actually has to take a look at what's already there and decide if it has what it needs or if it needs to generate it. I'm trying to see if my rule is taking effect here. It seems to know concise test and happy path, which it's following my testing guidelines. So let's see if it does a better job. Okay, so let's go through and see if we want to keep what it did. It has, I believe, repeated itself a bit here and added back in more of this code. Yeah, it looks like this is pretty redundant with already there. I'm actually going to keep this, and I think I'll delete the other work that it had, which now I know a little bit better about what to do with my notebook. This has rewritten some things. That is fine for now. I will probably let agent remove the old functions rather than do it myself to make sure it cleans up every place it should. Okay, looking at my unit test, this is the big test. I do not see using Databricks Connect for the Spark session, so it didn't quite capture that. It is using some PyTest fixtures, which is good practice. It is keeping these as functions instead of classes, which is part of my testing guidelines. And if we keep going, do we only have a couple of these? Oh, it did jump into a test class. So that's something that I could tell it a little bit more harshly, that I do not want it to add a test class for a couple of tests. So it has gone through, and because I left the two older functions in there, it's created a couple of tests for each function that exists. That makes a little more sense. And now it's jumping into some integration tests, which I haven't given it much guidance on at all yet. So what I would probably do here is keep everything I've got and start to play with the code and figure out what I want to tell it to do next. Okay, so now I've cleaned up this notebook. Let's figure out where we're at here. I've got my initial set of code I did with some prompting. I ran some SQL statement just to make sure the table's working. Then I ended up in this position where I removed the first set of work against the function, and now I've got this new, basically fully rewritten piece that uses my function and does some stuff with it without writing back to a table, because I haven't told it to write this data to a table yet. So there's a variety of places I could go from here, but first I want to do some cleanup. I removed a couple of the usage of a few functions. Now I want to clean up those tests. Here's something I've been skipping that we should talk about. Right around this point, probably earlier, I would go in and make sure I have a GitHub branch for the work I'm doing. So what I'll do, say remove all my functions and related files, except keep the function that and all of its calls. Let's see how this goes. Remember, we just checked this code in. If this makes a bigger mess out of things, that's fine. We can undo it again. Okay, I can see it's removing a bunch of things, but keeping that function. I'm fine with that. And then we'll have to see what else it's doing. Now where we're really at is we probably want to make sure things are working. Okay, so I worked through a few things. I got my virtual environment working correctly again. That's, I think, a bit of a Windows setting. That's probably not going to be an issue for you. I got it to switch to Databricks session instead of Spark session, which has made a big difference here. And I am ready to run my test again. Let's go ahead and kick off our PyTest via virtual environment and see what results we get. Okay, great. My tests have passed. I've now got working code. I could go through and do some cleanup either by using the agent or by just deciding what I like by, doing a bit of a code review. So we have used our cursor rules quite a bit. I want to call out that we've got some other cursor settings that can be pretty important here. I won't go through all of these. I'm not going to give you the full rundown. So within Cursor, a couple of things that go well with rules are actually docs and MCP integrations. So let's start with the docs side of it. I don't do a lot here anymore because I've actually got my MCP that I use instead, and I'll talk to you about that. But for example, I just added a Databricks Connect that would be a link to the docs for Databricks Connect specifically. I could also go and grab like the top level link for Databricks. Let's see if I just convert this to be all the Databricks docs. I could go in and add those here and tell it directly, here's a page of documentation I want you to work with. Now, if you're adding docs in your own GitHub repos, you could point to the docs section of your GitHub repo. Okay, so that's a useful thing to do and doesn't require any sort of MCP for that. When it comes to MCPs, which are model context protocols, right? They're the way that we can give like a consistent way of interacting with tools to our agents. The one that I'd highly recommend using is Context 7. Context 7 is going to give us this way to check on libraries and docs that are already managed for us. And so if we go to context7.com, you can search around for like what types of docs are already included. And if I look at Databricks, I can see that it's got some of these already here. You can take a look at how do I set this up to work with Cursor. If you come down into the README, you'll see some different options about configuring this thing. So I typically have this on, I turn that off. There's some managed MCPs available from Databricks currently, one for Unity Catalog functions like UDFs in Unity Catalog that you've created. One is for Genie, which is really great if you have a data set you're going to ask questions of regularly. You can go ahead and set up a Genie workspace in Databricks and then connect that directly as a tool. And another is for vector search, which can be really useful if you've got some index things that you want your agent to have access to. Now there's other projects in the works. I'd say there's some that I know that are a bit of a kind of experimental project being done by field engineering, not an official Databricks thing. And I'm kind of waiting to see exactly which ones get the most support, whether or not Databricks product team brings something to the table that kind of has the same sort of features before I say this is the tool to use. So I'd say keep an eye out for, what I post here, if I add anything to the description in the future about additional MCPs, or if there's something super exciting, I'll try to make a new video specifically about that. But keep in mind that MCPs can be handy, but we can do a lot of work just by having the right rules, the right documentation, and telling our agent what we want it to do, and it'll figure it out as we go. And don't forget, we can also add our own sort of code examples either to this code base and reference those, or we could go ahead and point to like add in a site here that we want it to take a look at and get some information from. So there's kind of our summary of how MCP and Docs fits in, and we got to see our test working, and we're at a pretty good spot with this project. There's a lot of other capabilities we could get into and a lot of ways of providing more examples and more context to our agents. We'll save those for additional discussions or for some great work that other people are posting and sharing out there. Okay, we made it through our demo. We were able to talk through what does it look like to set this up. A little bit of repeat of what I've done in the past with Visual Studio Code, but hopefully that was clear. What does it look like to run, generate code using AI in Cursor without a lot of rules and context added? And we saw some mistakes happen, things that at least I didn't like happen. And then what does it look like to do this a little bit more effectively with rules? This isn't the ending point, right? You're going to need to fine tune these rules to what you need. Maybe look for other types of context you can add, whether that's MCPs, docs, maybe you point it at your own examples on GitHub. You probably even notice there's like a GitHub connectivity MCP you could look at. It's not something I'm using right now. I just kind of point it directly to public examples personally. So if this was useful, I really would love for you to subscribe to this channel so you can see if what comes up next related to Databricks and data engineering, probably with a bit of AI mixed in. Even if that's not in the next title, I'll probably be using these tools as I go forward. So with that, I appreciate your time and I'll see you next time.